Namo Shriye, Namo Shriye, Soha. Om Namo Shriye, Namo Shriye, Namo Shriye, Soha. Om Namo Shriye, Namo Shriye, Namo Shriye, Soha.
Everyone, please turn off your internet access. Good morning again, Rinpoche. Tashi Tale. Good morning, Katrina. Thank you for translating for us. And welcome to everyone who's participating online. Please make a note that there will be no class next Monday due to the July 4th holiday, but we'll resume on July 14th at 9 a.m. And the link for the prayers that we'll do this morning is in the chat box, so now we'll begin.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, oneness God, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and in conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakti Muni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who are wise, that I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner, the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash, a lightning, a cloud, we condition things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of psychic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru,
Recording in progress.
Sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirayatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh yeah. 대한 지게도 뭐지 바카서. 강시 설네 렌제 잡아야 살아. 강시 설네 렌제 잡아야. 년주 착발기 봐 대외 장사. 강시 미르께네 대바다 기바드니 체럽름 발라서. 와. 배나 미쪽으시. 와. 초알아서 봐 강가 쪽으시. 콜리아 근데 뇌제치 요바체 뇌제데 세이 마셰 딜레 렘부치페 짜침부시부던데 괜찮다셔비시요이나 코데 하마고체 코란 쪼부시다라 디 괜히 루세다다 쪼벌 루세다 뇌제체 샤바이나서라 베 방부찌그라 코란 쪼부레 가게 말다 콜르는 다침부시부치요라 디파 베쇼요 부치시나 네코 배 무슨 소가 싶으신 요래 얘네 그때 하게 그거 말해 야보임 바다 그 세다 무시가리 나고 그 쪽벌로 쓴다 괜히로 서럽던데 집에 주제다 디제네 주된 바보 배 방불했으라 제마코 하거나 치사르데 배주시야 마줘라 어디지도 배 대신도 쓰어라 간시 설네 렌제 때바이 년주 착벌기 버데 년주스 쭈버쭈 서럽지 야 하하스 쭈버쭈 어떤데 제가 들려줘서 야 괜히 루스 제스네 만디서만 년주 착벌기 버데 줘서 간시 미루께네 티바타 기바테네 체럽을 발라서 아가라주 망차지 던돌라 소바다 교환담다 멤버마무네 그러와 대화제단 저버주 상에 밀려 딱바리스 토에게요 말 다를 레지 토대로 다른데 배 섭소 셔브차시 너 그시미르 겐티보다 체럽을 발라베네 지다가시 센데치부턴다 조주 되고라 사체네 조주나 배방보라 랑게 르텐 셔부치 사치부치 랑이 마음바다 다다카리 내 야부시부치 소야 네바요 알아라래 이 네바요 바하마고 제 어떤데 메시 때문에 최수수 센데치부턴다 조주베나 배방보래 송도 어야 체럽을 발라 lumbe 나글을 보래서 말이야 뭐지
So here, as it is said, whoever, if they were to have a golden vessel encrusted with jewels, if they were to use that as a receptacle for their vomit, someone who, having been born a human being, engages in negative activities, they are even stupider. They are even more foolish. So here, while we have been born as a human being, we should be using this life that we have right now in order to do something meaningful. So here, if you had like a poor person who has this vessel that is made of gold, that is encrusted with all kind of jewels, but they don't recognize the value of the thing that they have, and they were to use that vessel, say, to put their trash in or for something really dirty and gross, it would be such a waste for this person who is really suffering and struggling to have something that is so valuable, but they don't recognize the value of what they have. And so instead, they use it for just all kinds of dirty things. So no one would want to use it again, like a place to vomit into or for dirty, sort of gross things. So we would see as worldly people that as being very stupid to have the ability to get out of your poverty, but to not use it as such, and instead use it for all kinds of things that are less than desirable. But so here, most of us right now, we have this human life with all of these leisures and endowments, but most of the time we take births as, say, animals or in positions where we don't have such conducive conditions. We have just this once, right now, attained this kind of form on the basis of which we can accomplish great benefit for our future. So if we aren't careful, but we just sort of use this life for negative activities, for worldly things, for the things of just this life, then when we have the incredible ability to be able to benefit our future, really, that is much stupider than the person with their golden vessel using it for trash, for rubbish. So right now, while we have this life, have all of the conducive circumstances to be able to practice the Dharma, to let that go to waste, to just engage in negative activities, pursuing the affairs of this life, it's basically the greatest stupidity of stupidity, the most foolish of the foolish.
Oh, yeah. 어디 있는 거라서 단단 밀리터부터 송기와라. 어디를 하더니 그 사회 동에 거에 지고 있던다 짠짠이야. 저저 대한테 번라서. 아니 대체는 빼판부를 송기와라. 어디 단단 덴바 치자고를 송거라. 단단 덴바 가르쳐 버려서네. 상주 신나다 최제고야라. 최세도 망쳐지던데 고다 지 부재제라고다 지던데 실 거대도 뒤쪽 말와 뒤손음 사이에 돈달을 들어와 이내 조대 소수 령아 예송리아 주주다야 돼 미게와 란다 셴라 뇌데 파 뇨르다 란다 셴라 페디야 마르다 뒤제고야라 뒤제네 센델에 라기바요라 콘도 촌도레 나제 촌도레 타도 촌도레 요 밀레 차와체데 뇨도레 밀레치니 간네 펜도 제차그레 티네 소소 키 밀레 키베 용구라 랑겜도 랑게도 줄레 티기 용구라 티 매네 초담 메든 바체 소체바 마쳔볼람 발론 춘타마치주 간텐데 첸디 돈다 춘주치 돈달이야 어떤데 셰체든 소소 키부 요마레 자마루 차그레 미 강가 카탄게 마 차그레 라 네 소소 냠도 당게서 콘도 사부체 미기버서 샤라 타도체 콘도체 가제세 티체네 어쨌든 최시도 첸딜이야 란테보 셴테보 라 툼부 잠바다 제외토네 내야 제네발레 때네 겨와 치마 아니 라다미 겨와 토야다 대다 링저 겨와 치마야 텐데시 때네 콘도 페어치운 그래세 계속전 데다 치마니가를 거야지 쳐들에 되어라 가지 섬들다 쳐시도 치마마도 첸딜이 쳐체네 네위에 서라지 펜도 매베서를 삼고다 어디 말아 세대 쪼라 쪼 소설령아 예수 최다 팀바 잠바다 저와 로아샹라 저와 맞아 펜베트버시 제베나 소소에 기버요래 첸딜이야 아니 미란 냠도 되게서 기버요래 첸딜레라 티기셔야 됐다 그래서 하고도 시pen조 짱짱게 시pen면도 펜조 망보 요나 가제 세로 신 되니 타도 세로 신 신바 메기버셔제 코라 대셔지 상로 땅땅게 자투 니좀 가르가르 세고 삼상 심드나를 니 굴마고 같은데 치고 샤요라 사코티 짱짱게 소소 메시데 티게 용야 된다려 지유나로와 근데 저도 매도 버셔지도 티게 용야 임베 깨저데 동에 용야 줄도 요라 삼르단단데 소소리하고 지고에 삼게 티치고라 이나가 제타도 텐심라서바 최단 같은 배 차와도 저배나 랄디기 용거 말아 내가 용거라 랄네 샬네 용거라 어디 리산 코 가르소다 최디 가르소래 딕바 담미게 와라 샤네 최최선에 되게 딸이한 도서 배전에 도다 티처 마르세 가르스네 소보칼레시지 캡지치 체네 티처 마르세 최세데 샬네 바방바다 샬네 펜바투베 드레지 코아레 송도 어디 인데 소소 대저 밀리티 돈단 덴바식 로아 용알로 야네 추 더버 고스 비초바 상부체 오레스 디마전에 베팡보레 송도 야
So, here, right now, we have this kind of life with all of the freedoms, the endowments to be able to practice the Dharma. And so, if we are to just make efforts to get our food and clothes and necessities and sustain ourselves, really, that is quite a waste. That's quite sad to use our life that is so precious for things just of this life, just to be able to maintain ourselves. But really, when we talk about doing the Dharma is about doing good deeds. Often, when we think about the Dharma, we think, oh, doing prayers, doing pujas, those sorts of activities. Those are really to increase our merit, increase that store of positivity. But the essence of Dharma is to reduce harm to others by watching the activities of our body, speech, and mind to, as much as we can, engage in a positive way with others and not harm them in any way. So here, when we are able to do that, to reduce the ways in which we act harmfully toward others, then this benefits us in this life as well. This is something that is beneficial for our future lives, but it also reduces our anger, reduces our pride, reduces our jealousy. It makes us happier in our life right now, and we benefit those around us by our practice of the Dharma. So if we act in this way, where we make an effort to not create harm for others, and we do as much as we can to be of benefit to them, we are going to have more friends. We are going to have a more harmonious and loving kind of an existence with fewer enemies, and so forth. But if we just sort of follow after doing whatever we want, thinking, oh, I'm going to get happiness from things or from accomplishing, sort of following after our afflictions, we'll have more enemies. We'll have more criticism. We will go through the world with more anger and more pride and more jealousy, and really suffer more in the present as a result. So to act in ways that promote our sort of having harmony and affection with others, that's really what we mean by doing the Dharma. It's something that doing the Dharma is about benefiting ourselves in the present as well as in the future. And really, this is to act, the main sort of essence of Dharma is to act with our three doors in ways that are not harmful to others, that in as much as we are able to benefit them. And so here and now, that is going to bring us peace and happiness. It's not as though we are able to gain happiness from having wealth. We can see that people can get lots of wealth, but then there's all of that that comes with it, trying to defend that wealth, trying to get rid of your enemies, trying to make sure that you protect that. And in the course of doing so, you engage in all kinds of negative actions, not recognizing the kind of future suffering that that will bring. So we think that we are getting our happiness through that, but we're actually creating the conditions for our suffering. And so here, when we harm others, we end up harming ourselves. We are creating the conditions to experience more suffering. That's really what non-virtue is about, as we have been discussing above. When we engage in those kinds of activities, that create harm for others and that are not beneficial, then we are going to experience suffering as a result. So really, the difference between Dharma and non-Dharma, Dharma isn't just doing physical austerities, as we saw before, but it is rather the abandoning of harming others and doing as much as we can to benefit them. So knowing that and really implementing that in how we live our lives is the essence of the Dharma.
뭐야 어떤 다 되고 산재 송거도 디버지하면 자신 개와 풀숨 속았어요. 랑게 셈내 용서 된데 산재 때문에 산재가 롱기 때문에 또그 때문에 니어라 롱기 때문에 소소 최니 터바시 삼르다 또그 때문에 생겨라 디나시 소소 냠리 치니까네 소소 냠리 쳐배나 아니 말 또그 때문에 생겨라 롱라 최니 산재 송니 셰셰데 산재기 tempa zingiora, lungi tempa zingiora. 제 전다디 진이 소소 냠니도 셰티 제베나 또베 담바 생겨라 상제 담바던 제리오래 어디인데 디버지야 메샤시스데 샹라 제베토네 샹리아 너버지야 메샤시스라 샹라 동에 중에 규지야 메샤시스 대화 부선 서버제 샹리아 팬토가 대화 중에 규 첸디다 치마라 대화 중에 규 가리나 뒤쪽에서도 대화 부선 서야 랑게 셈니 원선데 띠인데 당부 스스 셈디 꿀론데 셈디 야부여거라 셈디 야부진 들소나 아니 령아 저번 들라데 용거라 셈디 경보체 차다 니르데 강가 경보체나 니 령아 저번 정부 용거라 어디엔데 고 구숨 양당바 처와 방배토네 샬라 잠제 꾸네라데로 참 저에 꾸네라데 샬라 처와 너버치니 바 샴베 대화단 트렌드지 샴베 꾸네라데 샬라 진이 팬도 주서 대가체로 체로 다네 네 동해 탐제다 저 타르바토바 차기 심제신다 삼마 대화 타르토 버산제 요코반 버도 토바 차기 심 텐데 삼류야 가게 고요라 뭐 되는데 대산제 손바나 신게 텐데 소소 쉐딩에네 고숨 저바 사르 다로 냠바든 요르 다네 텐데 신다 타바 심제 라치부ton다 마이 바 심제 탐제가 더 쭉통되게 그것이 연대 군대지 강사실은 좋아하셔 인삼 대체도 쇼년게 인삼 군호세 때문에 서버쇼서
So here, when we talk about the Dharma that was taught by the Buddha Dharma can be subsumed in the Dharma of scriptures and the Dharma of realizations. So scriptures refers to that which we explain and which we hear, and it is based upon holding those scriptures, engaging with those scriptures, that we can give rise to realizations. When we then engage in the practice of those meanings, we are able to uphold the Dharma of realizations. So we have met with the Dharma. We have that opportunity to both uphold the kind of scriptures as well as the realizations. So here, as the Buddha has said in what we just recited, do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So we should not do anything that is the cause of suffering for ourselves or for others. And so we should avoid anything that is a negative action in that it is the cause of suffering, and do whatever is the cause of happiness, both in this life and the future. And if we allow our minds to just sort of proceed as they do, be wild and unruly, then we are going to run into troubles. But by subduing, by taming the mind, then we are able to proceed according to the Buddha's teachings. So if we, by a function of developing our mind, by looking at others with this sense of compassion, wishing to free them from their suffering, and actually acting in ways that will do so, as well as trying to develop this sense of love for others, these are the kinds of attitudes that one increases and expands more and more, eventually wishing for all sentient beings to have that highest, most definite good of Buddhahood. And so we listen to the teachings, and based upon that, we work with our own mind. We expand and develop those attitudes until we reach that highest state. So here we should undertake, we should set a motivation for listening to these teachings, thinking that it is not just for our own happiness, but rather to be able to bring all sentient beings to this highest happiness. I'm striving to accomplish the state of Buddhahood. In order to be able to do that, I am going to listen to these teachings.
오야 당한도데 참데 될래요 봐 쇼로가 니시 잡게데 그래서 친사서 다티 마치 로치 엔데 제가라나 네 다에 다기를 여체 봐세 다에 봐라 다기 여체 봐 걔네 담배 돈도 걔네 담배 돈도 로서 당하라도 네 고대야 전에 근데 삼로단에 하고 있어도 가라조 남주 로 렌제 나래 소소랑신 삼로 코데데 나가 삼사 삼리스코도 와 아니 나가 삼사도 같이 난게도 와 어제 나간다는데 가든도 따뜻한 남주네 나 세도 라와도 난게 와라 소보 땡에 소보레 세로 네 sembar에 세로 ngādi tili lō sura chi yobachi samlo kōgdwa, rāngā rōchi. Ngāi siddhi tsa, ngāi lū siddhi yāng kōrā rāngā rōchi yobachi. O tindē samlo kōrā nāshingi, ngādi yō mārēs, tembar mē bā sungudwa, ngā rāndu tōngā nāshin, ngā samsa, ngāi samsa, ngādi rāngā chik. Māmbuchi tsokpa la tēne pā, lū pā, tākpa samlo shakpa māhimba, rāngā chi yoba ngā tu namju samlo nālduwa. O tindē di yō mārēs sungudwa, tembar yō mārēs, ti tsumba rēs, tōngā nāshi tembar mārēs, tsumba rēs, tembar mātūpa rēs, ngā tu tōngā nāshis. Chāti sudu, tāgir yō che bāse. O tindē ngā tu samlo kōyā tētā, tindē nāshi tūpta māwa, tindē yō rē sēngi māwa tuzu sāri chiniga kōchō rā. Tindē tāmbē tōndu lō se, tindē samlo te, tāngā nāshi, samlo kōyā nāshi, ngōne tāndē tī nāshi yō mā rē se. Tōng tāmbal, tōng ngōne alī tindē nāshi yō mā rē se ora. Tāmbē tōndu lōpa rē se. Chinji lōre tī nāshi yō mā rē se ora. Ngōne tāndē lōpa, ngōbe nē chūlyā, ngā rāntu sāmba tī nāshi yō mā rē se ngōra. Tindē tāmbē tōndu lō se. Lōkwa rē se, chūmba rē se, tenpa mā rē se. Ane, kāngshī yāngdā chītāwa, kāngshī yāngdā chītāwa, yōngsō shēba, yī mīshōng sikidwa. Tāmbē tōndu lō se rā. Nō tere, tāti, tāgi yōchwa, chūmba rē se, lōkwa rē se rā. Kārē se nā, ngā tā ngā yī wā tē ngā tū sāmbā nā shēngi rāngwā chī yōpa yīnā se wā rā. Nē kāgī rē sā tē chū tāng nā tē rē shā sē dō tsū sā chī tāw sō bā, chē sō bā sē dō. Ngā rāng tū sāmblē nā lō khōrā nā shēng ngā tē rāngwā chī yō na sōkbō lē lō sō yōpa tā bā chī rā, sīm lē lō sō yōpa tā bā chī. Tsō rāng dō shīn dō chī lō sō pōmbō ngā tā tā liān rō sō Pumu ngā tā sāi juwa, chū juwa, mē juwa, lōngi juwa la sōpa. Tōsū sōpū chā tā, shā tā, tēsū tē pētī lōgā chī, lōsū yōpa chī, ngō tā tē yōpa tā pā sōpa tōwa. Tēndē yō nē tā kāpā ndō sī, rē 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 tsē nā nyē kō yō rā. Tā sū bā, chē sū bā sī tō tē sī yō rā. Tā sū tū tū bā, chē sū tū tū bā. Rō. Tē tā tū tsē sī tōwa, pē chē nā rō māngbō tē yō nā. Diriben, losu yore bese. Tinde chende sechu tangdwa. Tangtun chegi ora. Ngazu semki takwa na shidi yona, tati chegi ora. Ti mendo si re chene rao yo mara. Sobo de mare, sem de mare, re chene, ta yenge chi yo mara. Ane lu sobo da sem da tazula pe loga chi. Tata panga na shi loga chi yona, te yo mara. Pē lūle lōsu tāsi lōgā yō na, lūle nātā chū, lūle mētewa chū ne, tā nāwa tā, tā, tū ngē dū, nāgi dū sēti yōngu mārā. Tā di pē, sōpu tā pē kāgā yō na, tā pāngā nāshi kāgā yō na. Tī mēsā kō sōpu nā tū tā nāwa tā shā gu tōwa. Simba kīmbā jī shi tū tā kīmbā jī shā gu tōwa. Simba sāngmā sā chi tū tā di sāngbū mi sāngbū rē ngē bā rē sā shā gu tōwa. Ko tila tēne pā tāsha pa chiwa rā. Tēsū chāwa chēpa tēne tāga chāwa chēpa ndukwa rā. Tāda pē tila lōs chiwa nā kō lēka chiwa tē, sōpo tā, kāne kēchū shēya tā tēsū chiwa tē tāga chēpa ndukwa mā rā kō. Tāda pē tila lōs chiwa nā siwa rā. O tī ndukā sō rā. Tēnde tsē nā, sūsū sāmba nā shiwa nā tsē nā nye yō kō rē, tā sū tu, chē sū tu chūpa yō kō rē. Tī yō nā, ne pakwe nyamsha tongpa ni tse ne ra ne pakwe nyamsha shik siddhu zang o di re se kanga rangwa chi siku re ti siki wa ma re se pakwe nyamsha shik nga zu tsao shirib tesu na yuwa kanga te ji driba ju gawa mi ju cheba ma do ome tada driba nirshi se pakwe nyamsha ka siddhu zang nga zu tong te ka nam yu kunzu be chu driba dosu kanga shiru wa ra tongpa si yung wa ra o ti chi lam na maang da sa ya o di ka sa Tiche yangda chidawa yongso sheba ni me jo se. Ya tan digri ale chi lam namata pangda sa ya.
So here, picking up from where we had left off in the text, we will pick up here with verse 28. I think we were coming from 29, but we will begin with this 28, where it says, ultimately, the notions I exist and what is mine exists are false because, from the perspective of knowing things as they truly are, there is neither I nor mine. So here, these notions of I and mine, when we look at our innate mind, when we have this thought of I, there is an I that appears to us as though it had this kind of independent, autonomous existence. Like we think, okay, this is my body and my mind, and so forth. So there is this I that is the like possessor of those, that somehow is separate and apart. And there is this sense of mine as being really, truly existent as well. So here, what it is getting at, where it says that these ultimately are false, is because there is no such I as we think that it exists. That I seems like it is autonomous, like it is somehow existent in and of its own right, not being dependent upon being designated on a collection of parts, a collection of causes and conditions. So in reality, in actuality, that notion of I and mine is mistaken. It doesn't actually accord with the way that things are. And so therefore it is called false. It is known to be false. And so here, when we think about if the I existed in the way that it appears, we would have to be able to find something. It would have to be something that stood up to analysis, that was able to bear scrutiny. So here, if we look within the kind of collection, as we were talking about before, the collection of the five aggregates, form and consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and karmic formations, and the four elements as well, there's nothing that we can point to within each of those that is this I. It seems as though there is this I that is something separate, apart, that it's able to find or sort of stand up to analysis. But like as we examine in the texts, when we look for the basis of designation, or we look for the thing so designated, within the basis of designation, we can't actually find it. We go through and try to look for that thing, and it's not within any of the parts, but nor could it be something separate and totally apart from that basis of designation, sort of like an ox and a cow. If that were the case, that the I and the various aggregates were totally separate in that way, then when the body was sick, you couldn't say, well, I'm sick, because there's no connection between those two things. Or if you feel happy, the mind feels happy, you can't say, I'm happy, or I'm good, I'm bad. All of those kinds of things would be illogical because there's no connection between the I and the various aggregates. And so here, when we look at the kind of when we think about the way that this works, if it were the case that there were an I that were totally separate and apart, the actions of the aggregates, the various functioning of the aggregates would not be related to that I. You couldn't say, well, I'm doing this. So here, if we examine, we can see that this I does not exist in the way that it appears. If it were to exist in that way, in reality, then it would have to be findable by analysis. Particularly, it would have to be seen within an Arya's meditative equipoise that is realizing the truth of things. As we see in Nagarjuna's the homage at the beginning of the fundamental verses on the middle way, he talks about not coming, not going, and so forth, and the stilling, stilling of all elaborations, or the pacification of all elaborations. So within that meditative equipoise of an Arya, there is no elaboration of true existence. They see reality as it is. And so too, when we examine, when we try to look for the I and the mine, we can't find them as they appear to us.
뭐야? 어디 다 등한 줄로 나와나 시유나 다다 그 아니부터 네 째나 가드레서 제주던 거라 째네 니지 라서는 때 라버데 공그와 야네 안도 공네네 파베냠 샤시 그 생물이야 다다 그 아니도 여고라 또도 째네 쟁게데 야 공네 여나 여가니 매나 매바니 고라 진행게 로데 공공공도 무슨도 또디 라는 이거 다다 그 어라와도 두바데 라고라 세고라, 디세 말해서고라. 간실이 양다 치다와 관계치를 규정 양다바 뭐 내루 타도 양다바 치다와 신도 세배 용수 또바 세배 밥에 냠샤 이시기 삼무나 나다 나이완이 되어 말해서 와라 나다 나이완이 되는 저 삼번의 예매 제주당 당도제 네 연나 여바 매나 매바 타제 공공공공네 터둥을 숨도 동게 지와라 어디 승문아 등이 여고래서 랑원에 연나 지 매장 따도 제는 말아되는 동바지 세계가 말도 다다 다기 완이지 세계가 말해 시내랑원에 주바 세고야라 어디 지람나니 대상 쇼로같이 된데도
Hmm.
오야
So, here, if it were the case that the I and the mine existed as they appear to us, existed inherently, then it would have to be something that is findable within that basis of designation. We would be able to point to and say, well, there it is. And then based upon habituating the mind to that, meditating on that, you should be able to come to a direct realization of the existence of such an I and a mine. But they don't actually exist. In reality, when you search within that basis of designation for the thing so designated, you can't find it. So there's sort of two options here. We can, in this searching, either find that thing or not find it. And so here, when it comes to they're existing from their own side, they should be findable if we were able to locate them. But the reality is that they are false. They don't have that kind of existence. So here, it would have to be the case that if these were inherently existent, then they would appear, they would be seen by Arya's meditative equipoise and in this direct, correct way. But given that they are not visible to that, then there is neither the I or the mine in reality.
오야 또딴데 땅만 셔야지 양자 두고요라 랑원에 주베디가 말해서 뒤두고요라 네 가르성도서나 나제 레종 풍부 남세도 나라저 풍부가부터 저다 간다신 종아래서나 도매 말에 베고네라 니반도 지기 레사니 메달하다 라마도 지기요라 지난간제 레종서 나라저게 풍부다 다게 껴와데 걸렸던 종아래서나 도매 말에 방아 삼상아 라와치 여반 집bello 되게 군래나네네 레기디니 산텔레테니 용거라 소소 풍부데 장주 군주 템발레테니 종구라 녀몰레테니 종구라 어디 손자 가서라 나지 레종세더라 풍부가부데 나지 레종 풍부 남시 코에네 르론주 삼마 도매 말에 베고네라니 용거라 어디 손자 대경게 레사네 텔레테니 드부상에 용거와 저장 나지 레종세 풍부 남시 수기 풍부이나다 소화대와 동행이나다 로 ane samlu tanda ine dra mi ine mi samlu tanda medra yore tandu ine tandu samlu tanda sopo le temba chigi ko medra yora suji pumbu choy bundu jibo o tezu sama yonga de tambo yonsa de tome mare beko ne lani yondi nga samsa nga rawa du truban cheba ngai se ngai wa rawa du truban cheba tele tene ine kidegi le sa ne yongi yore wase wara nga zin le chung pumbu namse nene te kare ngarjin tene tondo chunsikidwa ti ngarjin te nga samsa nga rawa truban zimba de chumba re songa tal she sa songa kun zimba na shi yo mara chungli yo mara se lokpa re se chiji lo re se she sa ra ta ngarjin tene sora tondo chunsik nga rawa truban zimba ngarjin te tondo chumba re koran zimba na shi tonga na shi samba na shi yo mara se Nagarjuna shi tōngli tiri shi nē yō mā rē sē, tōngli nē tānda shandā shi nē wā rē, shē tā kō tsumba tōngli wā rē sē wā rā, ngā jē tēne tōndu tsūng sē, nē kāngi sābiyō tsumba tē kiawā tēmbā kāla shi sē, sābiyō tā mā sō nē kyū tsāwā tē ngā jīn tē rā wā, ngā jīn kōrā tē ngā rāngwa nē trūpa jimba kōrā tō nōr tē tō wā, rāngwa tō trūpa shi yō bā sām nē rāngwa tō trūpa yō mā rā wā, tī mē nā tē kī gyū chē bā lē tēne chōng yā nē kānsā tā 풍부다 때서 라와도 trubachi kawa yongres wara sabe gyo korante rawa도 truba meba cheliya tele tene chunga tege debutela rawa도 truba 풍부다 rawa도 truba taade yongu marese tandara dudo chumbate kyawa temba kala shi yote yo marese tandara ya tejilama
So here then proceeding to verse 29, again, this is establishing that this is not, this I, this mind does not exist from its own side in the way that it appears to us. So here in verse 29, it reads, the aggregates arise from I grasping. The I grasping is ultimately unreal. How can there really be any arising of that whose seed is unreal? So here, the aggregates that we have, our form and feelings and so forth, these all arise from this fundamental ignorance. We have that ignorance, and then based upon that, we engage in various karmas, positive and negative actions, which in turn then cause us to take up a particular birth. So it is from that thought of I that we then accumulate karma that then causes us to cycle, to take rebirth. So it comes from that unreal notion of I. And so here, when it comes to all that is within samsara, all of the abodes, the sort of enjoyments and beings as well, the root of this is our ignorance. So we have a kind of a particular sort of a form, and we feel like this is our form. We engage it, we have different sorts of feelings, we have a kind of way of thinking, and it's all of the various differences that we see within the world. These arise from the various kinds of karma that beings have created. So holding this I to really truly exist, then due to that we engage in non-virtuous actions, virtuous actions. And if it were the case that such an I existed in the way that it appears to us, we would have to be able to, as it was said before, find it. But this is not something that it is really truly existent. It is false in that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, like an autonomous something that is existent from its own side. So here, if it is the case that this grasping at an I, this I grasping, is ultimately false, it is not established, then how could it possibly give rise to a result that is somehow really truly established? So here, if the cause is false, if the cause is mistaken, as in we perceive there to be an autonomously existent self, but it isn't actually established in that way, then if the cause is somehow false or mistaken, then how could it produce a really truly existent result? It doesn't have that kind of ability.
뭐야? 다다가 디보션 되기도 되기도. 야, 다티 제리아 가르도서나. 또 공부 대다른 메덴바라. 토네가지 봉아리 주로와. 공부 대다른 메덴바라 토네가지 봉아 주세. 공부 나다 네 따라서 봐대죠. 라와도 주바시 랑게 통게 요나 티나시 매바도 통소나로 또 소나로 공부 대다른 메덴바라 토네 간지 봉아주 제 공부가라서 봐다 다디 다다 다게와 공부가라서 봐라 다다 다게와 공부가 니가지 랑원에 마주바 또네 제 공부를 때내시고라 공부 대다른 메덴바라 토네 당부터 바체 삼바체 공바체 야네야도 공대 무슨도 통해 봐도 로라야 타투도 봐 토네 나제 봉아주 어제 공공고 공내네 무슨도 또서나 네 림베 공간세데 총으로 친제 타라네 때로 때네 빵토고로 와 간세데 남중가중가 라와 나의 삼비랑 같이 삼을 거야데 매가차도로 와 그래서는 나당 나이와 라와도 매바도 공공공네 딱 바르스티 공대데 네 바로 제 무슨도야 또 테네 야야야다 야네야도 공네 네 공간세데 묘 총으로 제 바로 칠게 매가차라 nga samdu namyo nga zo nga samdu rawa ji samgiri te samdu ta chi so ne nga samdu tongba de sang go ra tene ta wa sambi nga se chi ma to ta da na shin nga zo le nga sa rawa de cha ya me re o ji so do pumbo te dar me den bar thon ne nga ji po a yu se te kon ba le tene ne nga ji sa bi de che pa pa du de se ra pa ju de se ne nga ji ba da pa ne chine pumbu jomo jus ngar zimbade pansona ne ngar zimbe wange lesa e mebre dore seba mebre gora ngar zimbade mena ngai samsa shukchambu shenja che seba de merwa seba mebrena ne ngemasa shange le yuna tela sotamge tia niba chenbu ya shuk cheru tangenge seba mena ane kewalen ya yo marwa kewalan de za tome mariba kuweba ane keba seba kuweba kuba lemba korwa seba da lemba nye de mena tela ya chashen de mena ti kewa de langi yo mara o ti inde karsura ngajimpa ne pongar yusura ngajimpa da pa ne tene pongpo jome juru pongpo la soba sakchen nyene pongpo rita nganjin de pa sona ne koya pongpo de yungu marwa chita nganjin pa ne trachumba chene ko pongpo de yungu ra kansa de ra koya pongpo lenyo je shama chenji pongpo dolen che ko bate kichi che ko bate yang shi yang chik lang che che leje nipa tsotu yang chik lang menda che ti yo marwa rawa me ba kichi tanda 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 ngajin pa da pong ar yor se ngajin pa da pa ngajin pa da pa ne ne tene pongpo chuma tene pongpo yo mare kewalan ya yo mare le da nyum ba wa ke kewalan ya yo mare pongpo yo mare o ya teach do ne ta chum ba se pongpo pa do ra teach lam na
So then turning to verse 30, here it reads, seeing in the way that the aggregates are unreal, one forsakes self-grasping. So here, when one comes to recognize that the five aggregates and the I, the self, those things that belong to the self are not existent in the way that they appear, that they are unreal, then this is how one forsakes self-grasping. First you hear about this, then you contemplate, and eventually meditating on that understanding, you come to a direct realization of emptiness or of the lack of any kind of self. And so normally we think I, and from that I, we then give rise to all of these other afflictions. So to come to that kind of understanding, repeatedly, continuously kind of contemplating the fact that this I does not exist in the way that it appears. It seems like it has this kind of existence in and of itself, but really this I, when one comes to a kind of understanding of this self, is existent in as a dependent designation. It doesn't appear to us normally, like right now, to exist in that way, but it is through the habituation to this understanding, to the realization of the lack of such existence, that we are then able to, as it says here, get rid of, or one forsakes self-grasping. And due to forsaking self-grasping in the second half of 30, the afflictive aggregates do not arise again. So here, if you abandon that kind of grasping at an I, you abandon the process by which one takes rebirth, this kind of uncontrolled rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. So without particularly that ignorance grasping I, but also the eighth link in the 12 links of dependent origination, that craving which acts as the sort of nurturing agent to bring about a future rebirth. If you have eliminated that, if you no longer have craving the eighth link and grasping the ninth link, then there is no rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. So we will no longer be subject to taking up these contaminated, appropriated aggregates due to the force of karma and the afflictions, no longer having those samsaric aggregates, this uncontrolled rebirth wherein we are just sort of following after. But rather, when one has seen this, due to forsaking that self-grasping, the afflictive aggregates do not arise again. Now, there are those who have become Aryas who have not cast away those aggregates, or could be born in samsara, or born due to the force of prayer and so forth, but no longer will there be any of that uncontrolled rebirth due to ignorance and the afflictions that follow from that. So one who forsakes self-grasping no longer is taking up these afflictive aggregates.
oh ya ta tanda dire do pongpo temban me ba to ba la tene ti kom ne ne ngusum do to sona thar ra ane thone ngajin pa jo ngajin de pa do ra ngajin ke me ba cha ra Rawa the Mab Congo Comdo Rawa and Belo the Mab Shadow, Pando, Deshara, Tome Maripo Pandora. Naji the Pansona Sora, Najiban Pamajo. Naji Pada Panane, Chini Pumbutine, Kavala Pumbu Yomare. Me Pumbu Yawa Yida Tundula Soba Karina, Pumbunga de Yoma, Kavala Yomara. Kavalambala Seba Kuiva, Kaba Seba Kuba Lembaquara, Tome Maripa de Pansara, Tiwang Niba to the Saya Yomare. Ninguém Sasha but in the yard, but there's a caressana. Kyotoma Mevana Sasha Maboyora, Qua Cochi, Kivada Miguel Maboyora. Tesuta de Carsura. Chuda Chuman gang is Sakambuli Sabur of the United Yomarwa. What in a Shijaco Seba the Mana, Nime led the Niva to Gendo Chenia, Jebuke to Yomara. Said that Jella Yansi Messido. Seba Mana. Seba yebe wanga chi kewa da lengi wara chi thoya yoba da chi saya yoba raya yoba ra chi kona shasha de tende yoba chi ko langi wara. Seba kona mena ni te liya yoba marwa. Cha keba seba yoba maru, kuba lemba yoba maru, thome maru ba yoba maru. Enti medi niba duji liya satu saya yoba mara. Nima saa shaba de karchi urasana. Se shaba de niba tujin songe keba seba kuba lemba yoba maru. Chudi mewa na shiri, sa kambul ya sabu deba na shira. Debu mea meba chagiwara. Ote yende ku kunju demba de pansara leda nyamu niti yonga meba sosara. Nyamu yomara, tiwanga sabe le yomara. Debu tela tene yonga geni pumbu nga ta taala soba kwa pa ta pumbu rawa meba ke rawa meba torko wate pangu yara. Sa ku tukun niti tunga demba da kunju demba ni kunju tempa te pa, tunga tempa te pa, ta tarwa tokdo de sungara. Didwa, chine pumbu jume juse ne kare sene, tarwa tokare ta. Chine tunga ji pumbu de jungu mare se. Tiende ne tunga tempa da kunju tempa ni pangbe tarwa tokare se. Tunga tempa pansare, ne kunju jude pansara, tarwa tokare jude se. Oya tichi lamna.
So, here it is independence upon the kind of realization that we gain through meditating on the lack of inherent existence or the lack of autonomous self, that one is able to then get rid of that grasping at an I. And basically, once one eliminates that grasping at an I, then there is no further rebirth. One won't take rebirth as a human or a hungry ghost or a hell-being animal, any of that. Once you have eliminated that initial ignorance, you are no longer going to create new karmic formations. And due to that, one will no longer continue to take rebirth. One is also lacking the kind of craving that is necessary in order to nurture such karmic seeds into maturation. So although it may be the case that we have many, many karmas that we have collected in the past, that we have accumulated in past lives, they no longer have the ability to bring forth results. It's sort of like if you have seeds in a desert, in a very dry place, there's no ability for them to give rise to a result because there's no water. There aren't the conditions for them to come to fruition. So without craving, there is no rebirth. Once you have eliminated that ignorance, again, through seeing, through developing the antidote of our normal grasping at the I as being somehow autonomously, independently existent, is overcome through a realization of the opposite, through realizing that these aggregates and the I are not truly existent, then we have no longer are going to take rebirth. No longer is one going to create new karmas due to the force of that initial ignorance. So it's like, again, we may have those kinds of karmas that have been accumulated in the past, but without water, without the right conditions, they can't ripen. So here, as it says, one has abandoned both the sort of origin of suffering in the sense that no longer do you create karma due to ignorance. Once you get rid of that initial ignorance, then one has eliminated the origin of suffering, and so too the resultant suffering is cut off. No longer will you take up these contaminated, appropriated aggregates due to the force of karma and the afflictions. So therefore, this is liberation. There is the abandonment of of both the origin of suffering as well as that suffering result itself. This is liberation from that.
Oh yeah. 다 단다 되게 된다 고고에 치갈 고고로서나 곰볼로 줍게더니 세버치 송도 와서 거라. 아니 타르바 토발라 녀라나 쳐지 담에 또바 여마에서 저바 마부 연구하래. 우마란주 바다 우마바카지야. 지단 마와케데 동반이 또고로 시그마라 라원에 주베 동바이 시그마 라원에 주베 요아레 시겨라. 때 우마란주 발레야. 때 녀라 타좀바도 타좀그래 녀모 방그래데 돈이 또고 말에 간사랑자투베 제기 다음에 버서지야 뜰레 라버를 또해요라. 진짜 또는 뒤를 마도 타바토발이야. 쉬지 다음에 가서 풍부 다다 풍부니까 라군에 매배 동반이 또고 말해서 진짜 생각만 보여라. 대주 말은 공부를 그렇게 공부는 시잖아. 택매를 쉬지 다음에 또 봐요서 택매서도 년도다 랑제니 됐은 거라. 년도제 람을 쉬고다 랑제제 람을 쉬는 타로 통계 요라. 이게 타바토발라 동반이 또 그래서 내가 dimang boyora nyarang ge dode bada chida ma tozo ge lo chen tongba ni rangu ne tribe tongba to ya yo mara o tin na shi che je ya nyen de lam la shu na ranje je lam la shu ba tozo ge tong ni thamu te to ko ma re se o tin de sung ge wara ti mar se go bolu du sung na shi tang ma ya sung ba na shi che na tenmen la che je dang me to ba yo ba te 세부자 하고 그래서 지식도 야 지질라나.
So also one thing we need to understand here is an important point is about the realization of emptiness. Again, this is something where the point of debate about the realization of the selflessness or emptiness of persons and phenomena is something that philosophical schools debate on. So there are those of the autonomists, the Svatantrikas, who would assert that hearers and solitary realizers, those pursuing the lesser vehicle, only realize a more coarse form of selflessness, the self's lacking a self-sufficient, substantially existent kind of existence, and they don't realize emptiness or the lack of true existence, according to some. So here, when it comes to this point, as elsewhere, we see that Nagarjuna is clear in stating that even those who are pursuing the path of the lesser vehicle, Stravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, have to realize the self and the aggregates as not truly existent. When we see that for lower schools, particularly like the Sutra school and the Vaibhashika school, that they don't assert there to be a realization of emptiness at all. But when it comes to the higher schools, there is some debate over this. Some of the autonomists would state that the hearers and solitary realizers, while they abandon the afflictive obscurations, they don't abandon the knowledge obscurations, and that is in part due to the level of their realization. But here, Nagarjuna has clearly stated that both vehicles necessarily realize the subtle selflessness of both persons and phenomena.
Oh yeah. 단데르다죠. 지들 멜로 때내소세. 랑신 송예 남여제세. 멜로지요나 셰고 따사주나 텔레바테네. 아니 송예 통그러. 그게 동도도 통그러. 멜로메나 아니 통에게요 말아 돌다니 주차에게요 말아. 지들 멜로 때내소세. 멜로라 때내. 아니 동게 송예도 그게 통그러. 동그레스 거라. 지라 멜로 때내서 랑신 송예 포메제세. 송예데 고랑원에 이버려서 소소 동원에 이버려서 통그라. 던드랍든데네도 공원에 이버 섬기와라. 생기도 주게. 고랑 송예도 한바 추날 통에 파츠지도 추추지제 통에 고들이 첨백게 지자요라. 현다신 두삼제. 밑에 저게 참참 추기도 하고 때나 참참 반여 접든지 지그라. 어디지도 다 멜로라 때네 네 소소 동데 그게 제신 손에 제신도 난 그래서 오늘 전에 동에 번나시 난 그래 손에 맞도도 요 말때 나라도 또또 된 잡은 되기로 신나로 이제 그게 때문에 때지 신나 잡으시고 제지 쉬지는 오늘도 요 말때 동원에 쉬 삼저 소소 시에 요라 참장을 가야 요라 참장 외에 요라 이제 손에 맞도도 개개 요 말아 이내 된 잡은 거네 때도 주제네 나기 요라 시마도 비게까지 쉬네 나야다 줘야다 가야게 요 말아 네 제신 손이 제신도 나와서 그래 그래가지고 어디서 거라 어디 가서도 선 집에 멜로 때내서 랑신 손에 남으지 손에 대문에 임바 제신기 손에 제신도 나서 그래 그래가지고 강간 남겨라 동게 손에 대 동원에 임바 나시 남겨라 일단 원에 매버다 하고 그러라 나쪽에 내가 하고 그래 다에 부춘주래 가리는 것이 왔다 진짜 하고 그래 대 하고 그래서 그래 지다르 멜로 때내서 랑신 손에 남으지세 전에 양다니 도나 중세전에 요마티 오늘에 양다고 더 오늘을 전에 제신 그 손에 제신도 요 말이세요 나도 담발 매배 빨리 자고 봐 맨날 멜로당 제신 손에 신세요 어때인데 멜로당 제신 그 손에 대 멜로라 때내 제신 그 손에 대 제신도 나게 돼서 이단 그 나와나 시요 말이세요 거라 지다 멜로 때내서 랑신 손에 남으지 전에 양다니 도나 중세전에 요마이시 야 this
So then turning next to verse 31, it reads here, this is giving an example. It says that depending upon a mirror, the reflection of one's face is seen, but it does not ultimately exist at all. So here, when we have like a reflection in a mirror, I mean, if we don't have a mirror, we are not able to get a reflection of our face. If we look at a stone, we're not going to get an appearance of a reflection. So when we have that condition of there being a mirror that allows for this, then when the condition comes together, we can see a reflection of our face in that mirror. Now, most of us understand that this is not real. It appears as just like our face, but it isn't actually such. However, we can see that with like certain animals, they are very confused by a reflection. Like they might, like a lion, for example, if they were to see a reflection of another lion, they might end up like trying to jump towards it and they jump into a pit, or they are sort of like batting at it, thinking that it is another animal. But for those of us who are of a certain age and are learned, it seems to be a real face, but we know that it is not a real face. We put our face in front of a mirror and we are going to see a reflection, but we can recognize that that's just a likeness. However, like we see this with film as well. I mean, the things that are happening in a film are not real, but we can still have a feeling of being very excited by something or very happy, or we can cry, we feel very sad. So here, no matter like someone in a movie might be getting hit or something, but it's not actually real. It's not happening, but it appears as like real. And so it is this case. This is the example of non-true existence that we see when we have our face in a mirror coming together. We see a reflection that is very much able to be used as a reflection, but it isn't an actual face. So we who are of a certain knowledge know better. I mean, maybe small children, and of course animals are still confused, but what is being illustrated here is the example of something that doesn't have true existence. In dependence upon the coming together of our face and a mirror, we have the appearance of something that seems like it's a real face, but it doesn't actually exist as such.
Oh yeah. 어디다 대지 소하시까 소래. 지도 멜로데네서 러시 송에 남으지 디페체로 제신 송에 멜로를 때 제신 송에 제신도 나그리데 제신도 두고 말을 스페데신도 세워라. 대신 풍부남 때내서 난제반에 메버죠. 풍부를 때내 그냥 소보를 통해서나 Pajo Kansa Motion Sobore Tonsona Teletene Kansa de Nagiwara. Oh, Tishin Pumbo Nam Tene, Nanzibane Mibar Jurse. Sosu Pumbola Mene, Samsam Migre, Mishanda Sobuji Tonsona, oh, Chichi left on some Kansa de Yobate Ramine Yobara Chipinetsu Yongi Tongiara. Ramine Yoba. Lagi Cheshin Sunye Cheshin to Naya Cheshin to Temba Mebashin to Sigara. Kansa Pumbula Tende Kansa, Rawa to Trubach Nagi or de Pumbula Tende Nawana, Kansa de Rawa to Trubayo Maresigara. Pumbu Namla Ma Tishin Pumbu Nam Tene, Nanzibane Mibar Juse. So which ton and Kansa de lectures, so car the chin, the Kasa Mirage, no, Tati Lepson. So the Condors and Mirage in the Otondo, oh, Koduja the Lepson, some Tengira. Rawa to Trubaripina Yunashagua. Oh, Mibar Juse. Tishin Sunye, Rangi Shingi Sunye, Shin Yanda Nito Tenga Mess, Tonda Cheshingi Sunye, Melola Tene, Cheshingi Sunye, Cheshin to Naya, Cheshin to Nawa Tatu Temba Meba Shindo, Pumbula Tene, Kansa, Rawachi Naya, Nawa Tatu Kansa Rawachi Yoma Rese to that, better Nakshin. Yeah, teach Lama.
So again, this is an example saying that when we have our face in a mirror, there is an appearance of a reflection that seems to be like our face, but that is merely a reflection. It doesn't exist as our face. So like it says in this verse 31, depending upon a mirror, the reflection of one's face is seen, but it does not ultimately exist at all. And likewise, depending on the aggregates, eye grasping exists, but that eye does not truly exist, just like the reflection of one's face. So here, when we see like the form of someone's aggregates, we can say, oh, I see that person, right? Independence upon those aggregates, observing those, there appears to us a person that exists in and of their own right, like from their own side. It seems as though there is this like autonomous person existing, not dependent upon anything else. So when we observe the aggregates of another, like we see a person's form and we say, oh, so-and-so has arrived, or we see that person and we get angry, like, oh, that's the person I'm mad at. And it seems like they're really, truly existent like that. In the same way that like a reflection of a face in a mirror appears as a face but doesn't actually exist as such, so too independence upon observing our aggregates, although it appears as though there is this person, this self that exists inherently or autonomously by its own force, it doesn't actually exist in that way.
Oh. This one. Oh, that on that car share with a Senate. Only Kansada Pumbu Teme to Towalatene, to Gunyit and Dogures and Javashagura. Kansada Pumbu Temba Zimbalatene, Koya Pumbu de Jungures. Kansada Pumbu Temba Mebato, the Congo Combalatene, to get them by the Kunjuni Tembani the Dogures. Chase on draw out on Dobani the Shagua. Chendred Dogbade. Pena Toata many Cheson Jora, Mayana to a Jogure Sera. Made and Dawson and a toy and dog to Resera. Or Tinashi. The Tungetemba Kunju Temba de Yona, Teletene, Yamota Lelatene, Pumbuti Ungures Tungeteba. Tin Dawson and Pumbuti Yungumada call a Tado, the Chendro, Cheson Roto, the Shagdoa. Or a teacher.
So here, this realization of the lack of true existence, it is on the basis of that we are then able to abandon the two, the origin of suffering and the suffering result itself. And so here, this gets into the kind of the way in which we engage in samsara and the way in which we extricate ourselves from that. This has to do with a sort of causality. Like when we have fire, we are going to have smoke as a result of that. If you eliminate that cause, fire, then you're no longer going to have smoke. And so, too, if we have eliminated the origin of suffering through this realization of the lack of true existence, of the lack of that kind of autonomous existence, first by hearing about it and contemplating on it, eventually meditating to the point where you gain a direct realization of that, that has the ability to then avert that basic cause of the origin of suffering. And without that, then we will be freed of the resultant suffering as well. So it's going to now turn to the kind of way in which we engage in samsara and get out of that, reverse that.
Oh yeah. 다든다 데 가르쳐 그러잖아. melon당 제신기 송에 melon라 때는 제신기 송에 제신도 나야 제신도 tembar 매바래서 대신도 홍보라 때네 다 스티나로 다서 라와도 트루바치요 나야 텔다 라와도 트루바요 말해서 대패도 자니 셰거라 다다 홍보라 소바 추세 랑신지 트루바 매대 대진 레버 좋아해 비치 배나 멜론나가 제신기 송에 신세 빼고 가라 배틀 때네 네 던다데 홍보라 때네 다 랑원에 트루바 나야 랑원에 트루바요 말해서 매대 배나 빼대 melonala 제신기 송에 제신도 나야 제신도 담밤도 아스페테신도 레스 오티 셰기어라 탄다데 나티지라면데
So here, again, what is really being taught is that the way that we avert this, so when a face appears in a mirror, it appears like a face that is existent in and of itself, but we can recognize through understanding that it's just a reflection, that it doesn't actually exist in that way. And so too, when it comes to our aggregates and the self, although it is the case that they appear like here to set it out as a syllogism, the person and the aggregates are empty of true existence, or sort of empty of inherent establishment because they are dependently originated, like for example a reflection of a face in a mirror. And this is putting forth that reasoning of dependent origination, because like that example, although when you have the kind of causes and conditions come together, there is the appearance of a reflection of a face in a mirror, but it doesn't exist inherently or in and of itself autonomously. So too, the person and the aggregates, although they appear to have that kind of autonomous existence, they don't actually exist in that way.
오야 다 들이야 제가 가셔게 제신기 송에 제신도 메템바 또야 돼야 내로 락바치레스 동이 락바치레스 인데 셰게 와라 팀아르 송겨라 땡아라도 인치데 겜보 겜고조 강가게 뒤또토그러 와 그래서 미치다 미강게 또 토라 보충준에 있는 마도지 뒤내로게 말해서 동반이세 그 내로게 락바치게 말해서 지치다 미사마하고도 그래 어디질라나는 데야
So there's also some scholars who would say that this kind of realization of a face in a reflection of a face in a mirror is sort of like a coarse realization of emptiness, realizing that that reflection is empty of being an actual face. However, it is the case that all who are of a certain age or have a certain amount of learning are able to directly understand this. So it's not really, it's put forth as an example, but it isn't like a coarse realization of emptiness, in that this is something that basically everyone is able to understand.
뭐야 됐어 지들 멜로 마텐 발송에 메나도를 대신 공부하다 됐어 다한테 가르쳐 그랬으나 다한테 초대잖아 안에도 간사 추진해서 봐 랑신지 두바 간사 추진 봉불할 때네 아니 간사 랑원에 두바 나야 랑원에 두바 매대 땡진 레버 좋아해 배쳐 배나 멜로나가 제신기 송년신세 땡제게 따게 네 땡반배가 두배 따듯이 요래 성구도 야
So here, then it gets into sort of putting forth the syllogism that establishes this. So we could say, for example, a person, although they appear to be autonomously existent, are empty of such inherent or autonomous existent because they are dependent origination, like, for example, a reflection of a face in a mirror.
다들 하고 그거. 근데 가사 추진해서 가지고 담아 가사의 수지 풍부 소야 풍부 듯이 풍부 넘버 10의 풍부 대주 그거도 가사 딱 봐라. 딱시로 봐. 속부지 그거도 와. 아니 때 속부 장장마도 선매제시는 지금 말로 가사를 말로 넘버 10의 그거도 와. 아니 초아 죽고도 초아 대화도 동에 유야가 주는 두가 주는 초아 뒤도 연계 죽고도 와. 아니 도시 어디들에 때때 말해서 봐. 도시에서 고고도 가가 제시에서 고고도 자 수지 본부 초야 본부 도시 본부 넘버 10 본부 때 요거도 대강리 안에 소고 날리네 고 사이 중아 로 추인 중아 매인 중아 롱게 중아스 차게 차다 차부차 루발라 소바테스다로 추인 중아스도 차다 추세도 쓰거라 전에 사이 중아스도 차부터 차듯어라 추인 중아서 매인 중아스도 저듯어라 저 맨에 대도 말아 추인 중아서 근데 롱게 중아서라 사추 매 롱세 저데 고야라 롱디 고야 우정을 소바제 티탄 고야다 지단다 고 남게 감데 고로 동산데 동산 고야라 나이 부가라 소바 고베나 동바메나니 자나시네 초도마로 우다도마로 세코티 고야라 대sol에 때는 메선부치 대요라 당당하라 좀 메선부치네 미션이 돼야 될이야 다시 한번 쉬어줘라 대sol에 때는 늘내네 고디샤고요라 tension rene ta de shagura mata tezola tension ma rene ta chiko rangwene dire su zu sa ju yo mara ta che ganga tenje de ya bo che ha ko na ane tomba de ya bo ha ko tu wari sa tenje ma bo samul ton se do tenje de ko la kar ko do ra to ngo bo kande je ne chik ba de ha de na shirwa ha de tombo so so ta na he che ta samlo ko de yo ra 나라데 컨디션 도 잠이 소소도 컨디 도 따게 와라 티타네 아버지 하고 소나 지다르 쳐제 다게 두시네 셰바 대신 꾸라로 차차 송고도 어 대다 소보진에 다가나시레 로 초아스네 다가나시 땅어버 강가 강바스네 다가나시레 메도스네 다가나시레 사추 멜롱고 조망보실레 뜨진데네 아니 증아주 팔레 바타나 아테 야보도 스파 따게 와마도 영원의 지주주사 지켜요 말아. 라면에 요 말아. 이나 땡진데네 마보지 초텔 때는 봐. 레파 다시도 지 죽게 와라. 콘주 내가 지도 내가 집을 샤고 와라. 강배 구제 전도스는 다 들었어오라. 칸에 질라고도 다 깨지 세계서오라. 소고대원면은 다 나샤 샤고라. 다 자샤세야 샤고도. 자 대졸에 땡진데네 다게 지진용 대화뇨 동해뇨 다 선보리 기부도 강가 샤고도 직대 감나 뒤에 마보 초는 마도 저 고라 직장장데 인시 찔 조조서요 말은 거 참마 텐데 남버 수나야 텐데데 빼게 심으시기도 텐베 닝부르 상게 좀 된데 텐데레서 텐진데 버리 좋아 손자 동바레서 라와도 두베 동바레 소야데 배 투모 마이고 샨달 매시를 되어라 자고 텐션 레버를 좋아서도 규단 깨라 텐션 레버에 요래 닥시다 샤샤라 텐션 레버에 요래 텐데들니 요라 규단 깨라 텐는 요래 제 끼고도나 사추메 론조아 사베제시 강가 촌에 걸리걸야 태양 것도 자고 랑원에 가라졌다는 거라 랑원에 드네 토양 베스로 설계 와라 코라사에 내가 부르줘야 저 토양 베스로 설계 와라 코코란 토양에 말이 규단 깨데 그 따다 되시는 것도 말아서 차와천부터는 로마다 메도 간거 같이 차르고도 금도도 처음에도 양담사 중부를 사용고도 그 규단 깨를 때는 그 연구 알았대 하고도 자고 규단 깨를 차셰도 지고 저렇게 마냠야 페지 간거 전에 근데들은 티 메도 닙샤 메도 야부샤샤세로 간거 샤고도 자 텐데데 야보 삼나네 쳐 강갈 찍바래 텐제 데버를 종아간 텐네 동반이도 셰성도 자와 싫음나 군벌로 텐제 데버를 종아간 텐네 동반이 랑원에 동바래세 조조사 찍게요 말아 가라서 생기지 초과질 지서 대치 인양분도 두분도 봐 샤서 다가 차샤기 얼마다 지금 두부대 간데도 예동한테 간데도 얘도 뭐 간데도 선 베네치 조조사지요 말아 가라서 대 연나를 샤기도 아마도 어인데 텐제 데버를 종아간 텐네 랑원에 동바래 땅에 매르베서나 요르다세 텐네 텐네 딱바데세 다시다 차셔도 저 때네 네 메도레 네 강바레 네 강사레 로아 네 소보레 네 컴퓨터레 네 남도레 스파타야도 어째 딱 보나시 자와 챙겨서 요래 자와 챙겨 디레스 질 조조세게 요 말에 홀로 요래 나로 따리 요래 에네로고 요래 땅게 미고 요래 마버지 고도 결단에니 안도서 남도 풀세로 고 포게랑 하시게 요 말에 그래서 강가 내가 지고라. 하나 다 남도 볼수세. 다 남도 밥수스마 쓰기도 코라 밤게 라와 지게가 말해. 콜로다 미다 따르다 로다 따테나 마보 쇼요라. 강가 지지 내가 지시도 근데 내가 생게지 남도스 명지 따셔라. 질 명지 따거라. 내가 생게지 아니오라 남도 난도요 버거라. 어디다시 강가 봐. 텐데데 마보 삼로 따나네 동바데 마가 삼로 코토라. Yeah, Tesla, Manta studied.
Okay. um, So here, when it comes to this kind of understanding, we need, like when we have a person, there is the basis upon which that person is designated, right? We need to have these 5 aggregates, the form, feelings, consciousness, discernment, karmic formations. We need all of those together in order to be able to designate a person. Like if we have a form, but there's no consciousness, then we can't say that that's a person. That also needs to have the sort of faculty of discernment to be able to distinguish one thing from another. And so, and as we talked about before, that like even within the basis of designation itself, when we begin to look at the form appears maybe to exist from its own side, but again, the form is dependent upon various elements. Our body, our physical body, is made up of those components that have a kind of solidity, the earth element, the sort of water element in terms of the liquid within our body. We need to have heat, we need to have that fire element, as well as wind to be able to have motility within the body, to be able to breathe. We also need to have that empty space. Like if we were just sort of one solid thing, this body wouldn't actually work. And so being alive involves many different components and parts that are working together, that are really, it is a dependent origination. So here, when we think about this kind of dependent origination, any sort of object we can take as the sort of basis of investigation and understanding. Phenomena appear to us, like the self, the person appears to us as if it isn't dependently designated, that it isn't dependently originated, but that it has this kind of existence in and of itself. And so here, when we begin to investigate a dependent origination, doing so on the basis of the person can be very kind of impactful. It's a good way for us to come to this kind of understanding. And so here, when we have a collection of these aggregates, in dependence upon that, we give this sort of name. Oh, that's the person. And then we can say something like, when you speak, when you're using your voice, we say that I speak. Or when you feel sick, when the physical aggregate is sick, you're able to say, well, I'm sick. Or when you get better, you recover from that. Well, I've recovered. Well, when we have this feeling of there's being this I that is somehow like autonomous, that is independent. But when we say like, well, I'm alive, I'm here, right? But we try to actually investigate and find that I looking within all of the parts, within that basis of designation, we have to have that basis of designation, but when we begin to search within it, there's nothing that we can point to and say, oh, that is the person. It's right there. This is it. But rather, they are something that is merely dependently designated on these parts, this collection of parts. And so really this teaching of dependent origination is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. It's a unique teaching of the Buddha. There are different levels of dependent origination in the sense of causality. Phenomena are dependent upon causes and conditions. Like when we have a sprout arise, it seems like that sprout maybe comes like from its own side. It doesn't appear to us as though it has this kind of dependently originated existence or even dependently designated, but it's sort of like that thing. It just kind of pokes through the soil, it comes up, and there it is. But it is the case that all phenomena are dependent originations. When we look out, we can see this. Like, for example, when it's hot, the leaves on the trees get wilted, they start to get limp. And it's not as though this is happening from its own side, but it is a matter of meeting with certain causes and conditions. And that is how phenomena function. So we look around in the world and we see these various conditions. Like maybe it's been really hot and now all the flowers are wilting and things like that. It isn't just from their own side, but it is this dependent arising. And so as Nagarjuna has explained, whatever is dependently originated, that is explained as emptiness. And so here, when it comes to any sort of phenomenon, whether we are looking at ourselves, a person, or whether we are looking at something external like a plane, a computer, a flower, any sort of other phenomena, those things appear to us as though they somehow existed in and of their own right, that they didn't depend upon their causes and conditions, that they didn't depend upon their various parts or on our mentally labeling them, but rather that they had this kind of existence in and of themselves, like a plane. Like, oh, a plane just takes off and it's flying now. Well, that plane is dependent upon someone flying it, upon all of these various different parts, the wheels and the wings and the various computers and wires and so forth. And so although it seems like there's something autonomous, something independent that is just there in and of itself, when we actually investigate and examine, we can see that the thing so designated doesn't exist. We can't actually find it. It is a mere name, a mere label that is given to this collection of various parts. So again, this is emphasizing the importance of the understanding of dependent origination, to come to an understanding of phenomena lacking that kind of autonomous existence that they appear to us to have.
Teba samba shera, tate yana yandu samlu tangu yora. Tate resha sam yu shana ke tindeshi yomara, shira pen yomara. Ta samlu tangu soso samlu tangu, soso nga sadu soso nga de namju samlu kande kogudo. Tina ne kondo sebe kabra chita, tunghe chunge kabra chene ta nga samsa nga rangwa raja mikse ti chigira. Choy tangi tuzu ti shena yuso tocho ta chik tindelia kande ne dugu yora. Jikpare chunane nga sidi nga de rangwa rachpe telejan namju de chi yoyo de te sayar rach tungi wara. Jikna chambu yongya ta, kawa chambu kiya ta, tindre kabliya. Sa titi nga de susu samlu kandre tangdo samlu tanga che. Ta tina she yore ma re sa samlu tanga che. Taga se migi chi shegido su yu ma sha che, susu samlu tanga. Rwa. Indi ta rachi ne ta susu de michen te yore, michen te ya tiliya kare chashe kare kukdo. Rwa. Nga samsa nga mi yin, samsa nga chi chi yin, samsa de rawa chi yu na. Ta taba yu sa de kawan se tsegi wara. Ta tun tse se, kang di ne chi tsu ji pa tu samlu tong su do. Kang pe ti ne che ya samlu ta ne ti sha ta rupa ta tsa ta chu si ta mambu yora. Kok pe na na che cha she nying ta rupa la so mambu yora. Tizu re le ke re de yomar, ta re yomar wa. Tine yang rong go de che le pa ta che kaka samlu ta ra. Tā tīle lōsu yāng chī yoribēs tādi kōkbē nāli zū tēngi rā chī nālo tūpa tēngi shandā chī yoribēs tē yō mā rā. Chirubadanga Shina or Nalo Tenge Yoras and Naga Chibeki would Takwa Chipu Rama, May Messi Chu Messi Yosa Yora. Telling us what is a Nabachanete Yomara. Takwachi Yona and I met Sayame, and the Tawame, Tungeme, and the Yagudwate. Then the Chiona to do the Yomara. What in the Samlata, and the Ata Tingan, Namju Samlakot Nashing, Tati in the Medo Asam Samlakot. Namju Samlakot and Sede Medosam. Yate Samlata, Nanzi, I catch you. Nanzi catch you. Nanzi catch you, and I the country some Kogota. Yate Nation to get Medota, Tato Sede, Pichana Sumbanashira. Susu Sobu Chashate, Timari, Tele Loss Yomaris. Te Riba Samlata. Tirerene, Sobu Chashaka, and Tarik Marwa. Or Tele Shanto Chior Te Yomara. Kede Pumbu Namleshan, Pumbu Seni Meber Josido. Pumbunga de Pasha and the Ta Logachiona. Net Sobu Nasuna Ta Nawa Sigmara. Soboya Rosana, Kamba, the legend Rosana Ta Roa Shatu Marwa. Pumbu de Tanshan Betachiona. In the Pumbu Chawa Karichan and Taga Chawa Chevan Dumarwa. Pumbu Karan Logara. Ta de Logachi in the Pumbu Letation, Bongota de Nobu Seven Nashi. Tapana Nashi. Lagwaye Nashi. Lagwaye Yama Yamarwa. Lagwaye Karichabete Yambaliachi Chawa Chevan Dumarwa. Otenashi Pumbunga Lepe Tadebe, no Tadebe, Tachiona. The Pumbu Chawa Chebede Taga Chawa Chevan Dumana. Naya married, Saya married, Drea married, Dea married, Kala Saya married, Kanaka share marriage Chandura. Or did it in the Samluta Yana Yadu Sam Diana and the Samluta, Comete Segura. Comete Segura, Tova Sambashi to Comjaka, Yana and the Comgo, Madota. Oh, yeah, teacher on the
So right now we are listening to teachings here about emptiness, about this idea of dependent origination, and looking at the way that the self appears to us, the way that this I appears to us. But we can't just sort of leave it at thinking or just having heard it and being like, oh yeah, it's just like that, sure, without actually examining for ourselves. And this really means coming in touch with that object that is to be negated, this object of negation, the I, that appears as though it were autonomous, independent, not dependent upon any sort of designation or parts. And so here, when we are, like, say, particularly afraid, when we have some kind of strong emotion, when we are angry, or when we are really happy, when we have something very joyful happen, particularly like we see there are those practitioners who go and practice in cemeteries. And this really can give rise to a kind of fear. And that sort of a strong emotion can help us to really get a sense of the way that that I appears to us. When we are really afraid or really angry or really excited about something, this I, in terms of how it appears as being sort of existent in and of its own right, is very clear. It can be very clear. And then we need to take that sort of I as it appears to us and do the thinking for ourselves, do the kind of investigation and analysis looking for this I as it appears to us. Like, well, where is it within all of these components that make up our body and mind complex, particularly like looking from the soles of our feet all the way up to the crown of our head? Is there something within our body that we can point to? Like all of the muscle and bone and flesh and blood and so forth, all of the kind of internal organs within our body going through all of those components. Is there something that we can point to and say, well, there it is. That is the I, that self that I feel exists. Well, if going through this kind of process, we can't find anything to point to within those aggregates. And so we might have the thought, well, is it something else, something like apart from the aggregates, as outsiders or non-Buddhists assert a kind of self that is a permanent, unitary, autonomous self that is kind of the director of the aggregates, but somehow apart from that. Well, if that were the case, then it would be the case that our self, the I, would have no connection with the aggregates. So when our physical body is ill, we couldn't say, I'm sick. There wouldn't be any happiness or suffering because it is those aggregates who experience that. And so this I that I normally think of as existing in and of itself, we need to investigate. We need to analyze, can this such an I exist? And if it does, well, where is it within the body or the mind? And so when we look through the various parts of the aggregates, we can't find anything to point to. But so if we look outside of the aggregates, there's also nothing that we can point to. As it is said, I believe it's from Chandrakirti, that if it were the case that the I or the self were separate and apart from the aggregates, then it wouldn't have any of the characteristics of the aggregates. So we couldn't say like, I'm going, I'm laying down, I'm thinking this, I'm happy, I'm sad, because all of those are characteristics or actions of the aggregates, and the I is separate and apart. The I, like if it were something like, blue and yellow, or an ox and a cow, our right hand and our left hand. Well, when our left hand is doing something, that's not the action of the right hand. If that is the kind of relationship that we have between the self and the aggregates, then again, the aggregates would have different characteristics than the I. And so when we engage with these teachings, when we listen to them, this is really intended as something that we then take up in our own individual investigation, looking for, like identifying the way that the I appears to us and actually trying to find it. Can we find such an I?
뭐야? 당연히 때리다. 박박 끈가워에 있네서도 다 끈가워서라. 박박 끈가워네. 대다바유 던토네. 대다부이 던토네. 동반이 셰베 던다도 터네 수고라. 철라 맥토스. 철리아드네. 내로 동반이 또베. 무슨도 또베 맥 이시기메 시럽기메 톱네서라. 던다 동반이 무슨도 또네 꼼네서라. 네. chula miktuk tani ki kelon namla dedme rangi kum rangi tachun be drebu toba che kelon shendala ya mene shenya tachun be drebu ya taba ya goba chi yore sungu yora o tindi tatun da de karse usne tungi toba te ne tarba tobe kyures tarba toba la ngebar tu tongba ni komkores wa tongba ni kombala tene ane nyomo nyor na ane nyomo wangi le saya mebare ru te tarba tobra nyomo segura nyomo pasana taba tora tarba topsu shenda chi lungba shenda ram ru tinde che cha yomara karchi gorsta nyomo pasana kondo nga che shado nde simla soba kansa ta jingle soba ro nganjile soba te sama pasana ane trajo bete bu topse gara ti chena ne le da nyomo bo ra me ba kyo le ti yong ma ro o ti su de 동반이 또바데 타베 규르레스 티년데다 랑제다 수 타바토나 동반이 콤고레스 티셰가라 나 티치로나 어디도
So here, I'm not sure if I read the verse that says, without depending on the mirror, the reflection of one's face is not seen. Likewise, without depending on the aggregates, there is no notion of an I. But then we'll turn to verse 34, and it says, as long as one grasps the aggregates, or sorry, having heard this kind of topic, the Arya, Ananda, obtained the Dharma I. Then he himself taught this topic repeatedly to the monastics. So here, when it comes to the Arya, Ananda, he, having come to a direct realization of emptiness, obtained the Dharma I. And having done so, he was then able to attain this state of liberation. So here, when it comes to what this is teaching that emptiness, realization of emptiness, is a necessity for liberation. To get out of this cycle of samsara, one necessarily needs to eliminate its causes, and it is the realization of emptiness that allows us to eliminate ignorance and the afflictions in order to be able to turn away from samsara. This is how we gain liberation. We shouldn't understand liberation as being like another country that we can apply to go to and we can just travel there, but rather it is from the development of this wisdom that is able to get rid of our afflictions that we gain this kind of liberation. So whoever it is, whether they are a Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, or a Bodhisattva, necessarily needs to have a realization of emptiness in order to be able to be liberated.
다 된다고 타르바토발로 돈이 떠고바데 돈이 떠발로데 타르바토베 교회조 백회 전부를 섬대하고 와. 이 가르에서는 다든 짐바되게 녀모간가 깨워도 가지고 하고 더 배치. 아, 삼간지 숙체버주자 내가 이 삼사 로와 내가 이월에 차고쳐 내가 이 소화 대화 동에 당용을 서버트도 유디서 소화 대화 등 알고 동에 고금에 삼사 이 참마되니 연구 봐라. 아, 삼가 라와데 매버지 곰곰 따버리시 곰나 근데 숙체버지 연구 말와. 때내 따고 삼진 아래 마도시 라와제 근데 숙체버 녀모 숙체버 연게 디마시로라. 녀모 시월라와 디고도 다음에 동반이 또고도 다음에 동반이 또는 녀모 총총도를 녀모 총도서는 녀모 세도를 녀모 세서는 다바토라 고액계와래 매차로 오이 뒤버쳐 다 대체를 안 되는 당하서 거기서 단디네 마저 코알라 죽베를 받아 독베를 받아 또 시에도 코알라 죽베를 받아 코 코드 칸데 거기라 코알렌 독발라 카르카르치 우리 따단도 동반이 또 시에서 제시거라 단데 마저는 들려 지시 풍부 제여바 대시텔라 간지여 간지여나 야래데 텔레야니 깨와 인세도 단데 코알라 죽베를 받이 시에도 코알라 죽베를 받으러 코아 코드 컨디션 코르기 와래세 기간데르세나 지시 풍부 제여바스 지시도 풍부 사랑하라주 풍부가 요라 소지 풍부 초야 풍부 소벌스 풍부가 요라 풍부랑 신기 두 번째 바 여바 지시도 시거라 지시 풍부 제여바 대바도 풍부 템바제 베텐지 마밤바 여바 지시도 나 삼상아 템바제 베텐지 데 마밤바 요라에서 거라 지시 풍부 제여바 지시들은 간지 요스 랑디 풍부 또 속보라 속보 뜻을 땡시거라 내 르시드 라와도 지 삼루고 요라 오늘 전에 랑기 르 라와치 요 말도 르리아 가리오레스네 메게 왕보 요라 나웨 왕보 요라 네 왕보 치 왕보 르지 왕보 치 그 참아 요라 그래서 참아라 땡션 되네 르시 샤요라 마도 디나네 르시 원봉아다 뜻을 강가 연계를 르디르시 직주주 생겨요 말아 뒤에 소대요라 뒤에 뭐부 소대요도 어디인데 지시 풍분 제여 봐서 지시도 풍부랑 신기 두 번째 배팅제 봐 지시도 시거라 지시 풍분 제여 봐 지시들은 한지 요새 지시 봐도 때랑 삼사 nga rawa chimbe nganchinde ayungure esgara Pumbu tembar tenje yoba tishito wa mari pumbu tembar tenje yone ki tombani tokbe shiro kombal tena ko pang ma chage pa to sigora tenje de mabamba yoba tishito sigora ta chonda shisi pumbu la tembar tenje de wa ke shinyu meba to ne mabamba yoba tishito sigora shisi pumbu de tishito la nganje yos Pumbu temban zembe tenzi mabamba yoba tesheto ngay lu xe ni nga xe lu tili ya nengen si lu tili takbu jengen si nemo tende nga zimbe nga zinde ma bamba yo re si wara chisi pumbu zi yeba tisi tila nga zi yos nga ta ngay se samla te yo na ngay lu ngay rwa pongje yu longche che su ta te ro re chala soba teso kanga le tene ngay se te ngo ra ngay longche che te kuku me te se ra teso kanga yung go ra o te chisi pumbu zi yeba tisi tila nga zi yos nga zi yo na nga la koye te kuku yo me koye te ko me se ta langdo che te yung go ra mi ka tong ya su yi na ta tra yi na ta o te nga ko me te ya bo me ta te ya bo do te ko me se te ke se kanga yung go ra besu che te yung go ra le sa ya te yung go ra te tong ta le ga chi kira ba kane ke je she kire sem ke sam tang kire lu ki chawa chi kire le sa su tu lu nga yi su ma to le sa ya ke yo ma ra kane ke she tu le sa yo ra sem ke sam tang tu le sa yo ra sokwe kujya kyab kari chikinde kewe samla kune lana kujya kyab kinanda me kewe samla kune lana kujya kyab kinanda chawara chidusan le sade yora te indi chisi pungbu zin yuwa tisi tila ngan zin yus nga nge sido ta nge tupcha yu nga panja yu nga lukundi kuwaya di me kuwaya di isi ene lega chigirwa semke samla tangire te tonda tabshi chigirwa ti le sa yora le sa sido tira chawa chiya tisi yora le kewa yore, mi kewa yore, luma ten yore. Kashe kewa pe toya yore, kashe pe mazane jenge yore, kashe pe ni me gengi luma tengi le yore. O chi yuna ni le dili jukure se. Le sasu ni tele ten drebu ni tewa da tunge yunga te yungu yore. Chisi pumbu zin yoba tisi tele nganzi yus. Nganzi yuna yang le te, yang le sa gure se. Tele yani kewa ya, tele teni yang kewa ndramata. Le chikin drebu kewa da sebe ina yang shanda chikin. Lekin debi kiawa de langre se wara. O te indi ko. Humbu temba zimba tenzi. Mabamba yoba te seto nga temba zimba tenzi ya mabamba yoba es. Tada dagi wa. Humbu sene dagi wa tera. Tada sene tada tera. Tada dagi wa. Rawanto yoba zimba te seto. Te yona se ra. Ane ye le sa gre se. Ngazin yona le. Yang le des. Ngal koya de do me koya de do sta tabshi chigira tewa da dunge nyonge chi yo sa de ko te tonda tabshi chigira ne le de ngo re sa tele ane jo ne le sange ge wa ge de do nyoe te do ne lu sange le gira tewa da dunge nyoe te chi ku gara ne mi lu sa nyae ye te do lu sa ro ka la na chi la che yo gara bi so nga je yo ne ya le tele ane jo le sa wa te ne jo la gres o tunda te ya o te jla na.
So, here then, this realization of emptiness, of the lack of some kind of inherently existent I and mine, this is the critical cause that we need for liberation. As long as we have that kind of grasping at an I and then grasping at a mine, we will continue to create karma and thereby take rebirth. So here in verse 35, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. If one grasps the I, karma will be created again, and due to that karma, one will again be reborn. So here, when we are able to, if we have this kind of understanding that it is this grasping at an I and grasping at mine, that then leads us to engage with all of our afflictions and in turn create karma that continues this kind of wheel of rebirth. If we recognize that, then we understand that by developing this wisdom, realizing emptiness, realizing the lack of such a self of the person and phenomena, that this is how we pacify the afflictions, which in turn pacifies the creation of karma, and thereby there is no samsaric rebirth. So here, what we are turning to is describing the kind of stages of engaging in samsara and how one reverses that. So this sort of teaches how it is that we end up cycling in samsara due to this first grasping at an I, or in this case, actually grasping at the aggregates. Because as it says here, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. So here, so long as we hold the five aggregates, our form, feelings, consciousness, discernment, and karmic formations, as long as we hold them to be really truly existent, we haven't eliminated the grasping at them as having that kind of true existent, then we will think of this I that we designate on the basis of those aggregates as also being truly existent. So like it often comes like we think of our body as being sort of autonomously, independently existent. It's really truly existent like that. We don't think about how it is like all of our body is dependent upon various parts and various causes and conditions. I mean, when we begin to look at the various components, we can go all the way down to many billions of minute atoms, but we can't find something that we can point to and say, well, that is the body, that is the form aggregate. So as long as we have this kind of grasping at those aggregates as having this sort of true existence, then we will believe that this I is also sort of truly existent. So here, like really all of the kind of efforts that we are making are based upon thinking in this way, that the sort of mind, the things that we enjoy, the things that we need and so forth, all of our efforts are going toward accomplishing these things. Like we need various things and we pursue them for this I that we perceive to be truly existent. We act, we speak, we are driven by that. So long as we have that kind of grasping, we are going to in turn create karma through the actions of our body, our speech, and so forth. And so whether it is a virtue or non-virtue. I mean, due to non-virtue, we are going to end up experiencing suffering. But we have, again, based upon this holding to the aggregates as being really truly existent, and then the I and the mine as truly existent, we think, well, I need this, I need to have that, and so forth. And due to that, we act in various ways, sometimes
Oh, yeah.
virtuously, but sometimes non-virtuously.
Oh,
And
that is.
from so here it is due to this process that we then take up this basis of experiencing suffering and happiness. No, 건다게.
Oh, yeah, this one.
나 디선.
당연히 데리다. 지시 본본쟁이 같은 세대를 가지고 이제 양을해도 텔레안에 껴와 있어야 돼. 그 거에 짜와된 거는 저기도 와. 거에 짜와. 거에 주베를 버셔거라. 주베를 버서 다 거에 짜와도 가려서네. 나다 나이와 때버리지 바로. 나다 나이 삼사. 이제 뭐도 거에 짜와래서 오라. 나진다. 와. 나이와. 나서라와 주어지. 나이세 부부랑와도 주어지 봐. 어쩌서 쓰기도 와. 이 코에 싸운 거 생기도 와. 지시 풍분지 유바 뜻이 들어가지 유나 양을 돼. 데려야 내껴와 인세. 디페센트 메터. 어. 디서.
디선.
어야. 대체 다 단데 가르셔도 쓰는 저러데. 풍부랑 신기 두 번째 봐요나. 그거 다다 풍부랑 신기 두 번째 봐요. 뜻이도 코에 싸워요. 대 코에 싸워 지그래서 오라. 결혼했더니 레서야다 가가 연구돼서 오라. 다 풍부 때 다다다게 어떤 버주에 동바 동발을 때네 안에 자존변 제부터 그랬어. 년도 자존변이나 란제 자존변이나 티진 자존변 상계이나 어떠서 간가 자존변 제부터 발라니 뭐 방발라. 안에 동반이 또 그랬어. 어. 된도 가서라. 지다 jikta sayagore, tate kansa tansi dala kabrin jikta sikidwa, ten jikta sayade karsigorasana. Pumbu nga bo ten jikba rangshin chan rawa, chichi kechigin jikba rangshin chan, chichi la tenchi dredin jikdan kechirwa. Ti nangli ani nga asa rangwa asi, yungyata yo marwa, chitan jikso la tawa asigidwa. Soko yunadra, sami yunadra, tsowa yunadra, kanka tanda yurte gora. Midagwan yure rangshin chan, gyudan kyan litana yurten kechiwara. Tīnāla ngā sīyā sīyā rāngwā sī yōngshīyā kora yō mārā. Phūmbu lān dhīl sādhī sāng phūmbu kāngā midā wāsi kēchī nyūr tēngi sī wārā. Tēsū tān dhē tēngi tā tāndi tāqbā rāngwā sī yōngā yō mārā. Rāngwā sī yō nā tāqbā chā kora. Rāngwā sī. O tīndi ko tī yō mārā sī tāndā rā. Yō rā sī. Tā chīmbā phūmbu tēmbā tēmbā mō. Jikdā. Phūmbu tēmbā tēmbā mā pāmbā yō bā tēsī tō anī jikdā yā sī. Pāngi mārā sī. Jikdā māsā nā anī tā chīmbā yō tabra tu mare sara. O tende gombo ludrup je sheba tende rese. Tende gombo ludrup je shungde. Nyande da rangye trachon ba tozole tongni tobo yo stale chen swa. Uma rangye bala so kashe nyaran trachon ba tozobe. Tongba ni tamu toko mare se. O ti mare tende gombo ludrup gomba na shishana. Tarba tobala nyan tengme ina teche ina karina. Tongba ni toko rese. Tese abishin shego rese do. Yeah, teach la this.
So here, this is again describing the kind of process by which we engage in samsara and get out of this. First, by talking about the engagement in samsara, and this begins with identifying then the root of samsara. So we need to understand what it is that drives this whole process, that so long as we have this feeling of I, or this grasping at an I, as it says here, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. So once we have that kind of grasping at them as truly existent, then we will, as it says, if one grasps the I, karma will be created again, and due to that karma, one will again be reborn. So here we experience all the kind of suffering, the taking up of new aggregates and birth and so forth due to this grasping at an I. And so as long as we have that kind of grasping at true existence, one will continue to cycle. But by realizing the emptiness of that, here by recognizing that these don't actually exist as such. So in order to be freed from samsara, then, one needs to realize the emptiness of true existence of those two. And this is what is being taught here. So even for arhats, those solid cures and solitary realizer arhats, as well as bodhisattvas, it is necessary for them to realize emptiness, this most subtle kind of emptiness. Now, so here, this is based upon, and in this commentary by Gyaltsab Je, it also uses this term, this view of the perishable collection. So when we hold the aggregates to be truly existent, really the aggregates are something that are changing moment to moment. They are perishable. They are not something that is sort of static and permanent, but rather when we look at everything that composes our aggregates, our form, our feelings, and so forth, they are changing moment to moment to moment, which contradicts their having some kind of autonomous existence. If they had that sort of autonomous existence, they would be permanent, solid. They wouldn't have that kind of change. And so here, although it is the case that there are some of the Svatantrika school who would assert that it is not necessary for hearer and solitary realizer arhats to realize this most subtle emptiness, as is clear from this text, Arya Nagarjuna is asserting that it is absolutely necessary even for arhats that are hearers and solitary realizers to have this understanding of the most subtle emptiness.
Oh yeah. Tata mategi koya tsawang yusimbarwa tata tadiwa angwatwa. Ta koa kursu di shego radi koa kandis kurku yorese. Koya tsawa teletene koa kandis kurku yorese shego ra. Lamsum tonda ume basigdwa. Lamsum lamsum che ane te thoman dere u dere che chiglin zo zu se menge sigora lamsum thonda u meba thomada ki te dere se di tangbu dere di niba dere di sumbare se de tsiya yo mare sigora thome mare basene thome mare bengelia niban duchi da kanga dogura ko le sange chiora chako taga se kewachi koyo wandu chene thome mare basene niba se mado thome mare bengeli kage yo mare basene yora tingeli kewa yora mare bo le sange yora otisi yora lamsum thonda u me base kowe kolo lamsum chera ta yoda yungra ti kebedo lamsum yora chera te thoma dere u dere kidin dere se ngajin tubya yo mare sora kowe kengo geme ye kengo shindo geme kolos do chile korshade kogo kutogura chikcheli chi yon chikcheli chi te tambore de nibare se yo mara o te na shijora kowe kengo geme ye kengo tabu penjin ke kyuchen do kwara jose penjin chikchi kyuche je kodo re sigora ti karesene leche ra sumde lam sumse sumde sigora leche kyawache nyamoche ti sumde sigora nyamoche leche kyawa sumde o ti nyamole tene lesa gyora lesa ne kyawa lengyora kyawa lambade ya nyamoche gyora ya tome marba gyora tu chede di tambo de niba de tache do ngi che yo mara tome marba ngado kyawa dosara kyawa lange chimene tome marba yong marwa kyawa yona te talia ne niba du che de kanga yokora te talia shanda so ta tambo de ne chong res kola toma merwa kola toma mere ta niba ne ko yoyo re mada toma de ne chong res che yo mare toma meja tama yosera o ta de ya de dos lamso tonda meba koya jingo game ye kolo tabu penji 규제된 코아를 주스. 와 kursude shara tatanda. Tome marebe niban doji kesaga chora. Niban doji lele tene ya tome marebe chigra. Kyolam bal tene ya tome marebe chigra. Ya tele tene chige chile roba chigra. Kyoache lambare tome marebe kunela lesa. Kyolambare. Kyolambare ya tome marebe chigra. Sako zoege yo mare. Ta tangbo dire niban dire se. 누구도 세요 말해서 그래. 지기지 들어오지 지기지 끼거라. 어때서다. 코 kursu도 시야라. 다 된대전에 단도보다 코르테를 해서요. 디스크는 아니죠.
So, here, talking about the kind of process by which one takes birth in samsara sort of spins, one could say. This is with an example, then comes in verse 36. With these three phases mutually causing each other, cyclic existence whirls around, like the circle formed by a whirling torch, without beginning, middle, or end. And so here, when it comes to this kind of way in which we take birth in samsara, as it says, these three phases, and it explains then in the text that this is referring to afflictions, karma, and birth. These three are like sort of like phases, one could say, but it's impossible to say what comes at the beginning, the middle, and the end. When we look at cyclic existence, I mean, we describe it in this way of ignorance. There's initial ignorance, but really, when we look at the way in which this proceeds, there's no way to point to like this is the beginning, this is the end. This we can point to a specific situation and say, well, this ignorance gave rise to this particular karma, which in turn one took this birth. But unless one had a birth, you weren't able to generate ignorance and then create those afflictions and engage in karma and so forth. And so really, we can't point to a beginning, a middle, and an end. These are mutually, causing of one another. I don't know where Geshe went. And so cyclic existence whirls around like the circle formed by a whirling torch. So although, again, we can look at the process by which afflictions cause us to generate karma, which in turn causes us to take a rebirth, there's no sort of beginning to that. When we look at samsara, we can't say that there is a beginning point. Again, although we call it initial ignorance, without having a prior birth, we can't have the situation or the kind of conditions to have that ignorance and so forth. And so when it comes to this, it is said that there is no beginning to samsara and there is no end. I mean, there are specific ends, but basically this is an unending kind of a cycle, like the whirling of a firebrand, that you can't point to, well, this is the start of the circle, this is the end of the circle, and so forth, but rather each acts mutually as a cause for the other, and thereby we continue in this unending cycle. Yeah, I think Geshe is muted, but yes, I think we are up for the time today. And we do have a question, but we're going to try to address that in a future class, so I'll just note that.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you very much, Geshe, Ginla. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katrina, for your translation.
고기민두, 단다 고기민두, 계란기 키 숨.
Okay, just a reminder for our online audience that there will not be a class next week due to the 4th of July holiday, but we will resume on July 14th, Monday, July 14th at 9 a.m. So we'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Iram Guru Ranamandala Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Recording stop.